The notification came at 7:43 in the evening. I heard it the way you hear something that changes everything. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small sound that arrives at the wrong moment and carries more weight than it has any right to. I picked up my phone, opened the family group chat, and read my daughter's words sitting there in blue light, public and permanent, witnessed by every name in that thread. Our kids want only grandpa for Christmas. Grandma can watch the dogs. She's poor. I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I set the phone face down on the kitchen table and sat very still. My name is Aletha Cade. I am 61 years old. I have lived in this Huntsville house for 19 years, cooked in this kitchen, kept this garden, held this May family together with both hands and no acknowledgement. And in 47 people's presence, my own daughter reduced me to a punchline in 8 words. I want to tell you, I did not fall apart. I got up. I walked to the sink. I washed the one dish I had used for dinner, dried it with the blue dish towel, and put it back in the cabinet where it belonged. Every movement was deliberate. Every movement cost me something I will not get back. If you're watching this and you want to tell me what time it is where you are, drop it in the comments. I want to know who's up with me tonight. Harston was in the next room. I could hear the television, some news program, the low, serious voice of an anchor reading the world's problems back to us. His phone had made the same notification sound mine did. 4 seconds before mine, actually. I counted because I noticed. He said nothing. He did not come to the kitchen doorway. He did not call my name. He sat in his chair and let those 8 words exist in the air between us, without addressing a single one of them. I told myself he hadn't seen it yet. I am not proud of that. I knew it was a lie before it finished forming. I kept moving, wiped the counter, turned off the kitchen light, sat in the small chair near the window and looked at my hands for a while. Before bed, I opened the group chat one more time. Harston had liked the post. No comment, no pushback, no quiet word typed in defense of the woman he had shared a bed with for 19 years. Just a like. A single tap that took less effort than breathing, and it landed harder than anything Brunelle had written. Because Brunelle is my daughter and I know what she is. But Harston is my husband. And that like told me exactly what I was to him. Something to tolerate, something to manage, something that fit neatly into the background of his life, without requiring him to stand up for it. I did not cry. I want you to understand that. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and I made a decision, not about what I would do, not yet, but about what I now knew. Something I had suspected for a long time had just been confirmed in a family group chat with 47 witnesses. You cannot unsee a thing like that. You cannot unfeel it either. In this house, I had learned to take up less space. I had gotten so good at it, I had almost convinced myself that small was the same as safe. I went to the window, looked out at the quiet Huntsville street, and for reasons I could not explain, my mind went to Birmingham, to a life I had left 20 years ago, to a man named Trevane. He never once used that word about me, not once in 15 years. I was up at 5:15, before the house made a sound. That hour belongs to me. It has always belonged to me. The kitchen in the dark, the coffee measured out exactly the way I like it, no one awake yet to have a preference about it. I never explained this habit to Harston. I never needed to. Some things you protect quietly, not because they are secrets, but because they are yours, and you have learned that what you do not explain cannot be argued with. I stood at the counter while the coffee brewed, and I did what I always do in that hour. I thought clearly. I budget to the dollar. Always have. There is a small notebook in the kitchen drawer. Nothing fancy, the kind you buy 3 for $1. And every week I write down what came in and what went out and what is left. Harston has never asked to see it. I have never offered. I keep that garden the same way I keep those numbers. With discipline, with attention, with the understanding that things only grow when someone is paying close enough attention to notice what they need. I was 26 years old the first time I understood what it meant to hold something together. I was sitting at a secondhand desk in Birmingham, a desk Trevane had brought home in the back of a borrowed truck, entering numbers into a ledger I had bought from a drugstore on 6th Avenue. The business was young. Everything felt uncertain. Trevane was on the phone in the next room, talking to a supplier, his voice low and steady the way it always was when he was managing something difficult. And I was the one making sure the numbers held. I kept those books for 3 years. I answered the phones. I sat with grieving families in the arrangement room, When Trevane was called away, sat with them the way you sit with people who have just lost something, which is to say quietly, without rushing them, without making their pain about your discomfort. I was good at it. Nobody trained me. I just knew. When the marriage ended, I left without taking anything that wasn't mine. I never petitioned for what I had contributed. I told myself that was dignity. Standing in my Huntsville kitchen 2 mornings after that group post, I was no longer certain it was anything other than a habit of making myself smaller than my circumstances required. I heard Harston on the stairs at 7:20. He came into the kitchen, poured his coffee, stood at the counter and looked at his phone. Did not ask how I had slept, did not say my name, did not mention one word about what his daughter had posted in that group chat Thursday night, with 47 people watching, including him. I watched him not mention it. I gave him the full silence of that kitchen, and I watched what he did with it. For one moment, I thought he might say something. His mouth opened slightly. His hand tightened around the coffee mug. Then he looked back down at his phone instead, and took his coffee into the living room. The silence between us was not the comfortable kind. It was structural. It was the kind that has been holding something up for so long that neither person remembers what it would sound like if it fell. Zueline called at 8. My oldest friend. I looked at her name on the screen, and I did not answer. I was not ready. The moment I said it out loud to another person, it would become a story, and right now it was still just mine. I needed it to stay mine a little longer. 20 minutes later, a number I did not recognize called. Atlanta area code. I let it ring. No voicemail. 3 minutes later, it called again. I sat there with the phone in my hand and stared at that unfamiliar number while the word poor moved through me again like a cold draft through a room where all the windows are closed. The call stopped. A moment later, a voicemail notification appeared. I did not play it immediately. I set the phone down carefully on the kitchen table, and I sat very still. I cooked for 2 hours on Sunday. Pot roast, rice, green beans with smoked turkey, rolls from scratch, the kind of meal that tells people they are valued. I made it anyway. That is the particular cruelty of a woman like me. I show up completely even when I already know what the room thinks of me. Brunel and Pruitt arrived first. Pruitt was holding a bottle of wine. He had selected it because Harston mentioned once years ago that he liked that label. He handed it to Harston at the door like a man presenting credentials. They shook hands the way men shake hands when they have already they agree on everything important. Delvine came 20 minutes late, alone. She walked in wearing the expression of someone who had decided on the drive over that the evening would disappoint her and had made her peace with it. She hugged me briefly, said the house smelled good, and sat down at the far end of the table. Dinner moved the way it always moves in this house. Surface politeness stretched so thin you could see the bones of everything underneath it. Pruitt made a comment about property values in the neighborhood, framed it as observation, delivered it like a verdict. Harston laughed. Brunel asked about my garden, and complimented the rolls, and checked her phone twice under the table, both times quickly, both times with the particular stillness of someone making sure their expression didn't change. The second time, Delvine noticed it too. Their eyes met briefly. Brunel locked her screen immediately. I served the food. I refilled glasses. I said almost nothing. Nobody mentioned the post. Not one word. Not one sideways glance that acknowledged it had happened. This family had made a collective decision, no meeting, no discussion, that what Brunel wrote in that group chat in front of 47 people required no acknowledgement and no apology. I watched each of them make that choice in real time, and I filed it away the way I file everything now. Quietly, precisely, permanently. At one point, Pruitt made a joke about people getting too sensitive these days. Brunel gave a short laugh without looking at me. Delvine didn't laugh at all. She lowered her eyes to her plate and moved her food round with her fork without eating another bite. I noticed. Delvine watched me throughout dinner with something I could not immediately name. It was not guilt. Guilt looks away. It was not contempt. Contempt performs indifference. It was something older than either. Something that had been sitting in her for a long time and had not yet decided what it was. After dinner, Brunel followed Harston into the kitchen. I was clearing the table. I was not meant to hear. Their voices dropped to the register people use when they believe walls are thicker than they are. I caught pieces. The children. A pause. Christmas, another pause. If the house feels, then a cabinet door closed and the rest disappeared. I didn't need the rest. Delvine was the last to leave. She got her coat from the chair, said goodbye to Harston in the living room, and then came to the hallway where I was standing. She stopped. She looked at me, not at the space near me, not past me, but directly at me. And I felt something lift in my chest, some small, hopeful thing that has survived in me in spite of everything. Like she was trying to decide whether to say something else. In the end, she only said, "Dinner was good, Mama." The door closed behind her. I stood in that hallway with both hands at my sides, and the small, hopeful thing settled back down to where it lives. That night, the unknown number called again. I looked at it, ringing in my hand. The same Atlanta area code. The same silence waiting on the other side. This time I answered. The voice on the other end was male, professional, unhurried in the way of a man who has made difficult calls before and learned that patience is more effective than urgency. He said his name was Mr. Bodine. He said he was representing the legal interests of the Johnson family estate in connection with the acquisition of Greer Family Funeral Homes, a Birmingham-based funeral services group. Then he asked, with the careful precision of someone confirming a critical detail, whether he was speaking with Olathe Cade, formerly Olathe Johnson. I said yes. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The words that followed were words I understood individually. Together they made a shape I could not yet hold. Shareholder, registered equity position, acquisition notification, distribution rights. He spoke them the way lawyers speak, not to confuse, but to be exact. He told me formal documentation was being prepared and would be sent to my address on record. He asked me to confirm the address. I confirmed it. He thanked me and told me to expect the letter within the week. He said someone from the firm was available if I had questions after reviewing the documents. Then he said goodbye and the line quiet. And I was standing in my kitchen in Huntsville, Alabama, holding a phone that had just told me something I did not know how to place. My name was on Travain's business paperwork, not as a former employee, not as an emergency contact or reference from another life, as a registered equity holder, someone with a legal position in a business that was now being acquired. The letter was coming from the Johnson family's own legal representation, not a stranger, not a government office, but Travain's people, his family, and the acquisition was requiring them to notify me directly. I sat down at the kitchen table. I thought about how I left Birmingham. I left cleanly. I took my clothes, my books, the cast iron skillet my mother had given me, and nothing else. I never filed a claim for what I had contributed to that business. 3 years of books kept, phones answered, families sat with. I walked away from all of it without a single petition because I believed that was what a dignified woman did. I had told myself that story for 20 years. Now I was sitting at my kitchen table, wondering if dignity and carelessness look identical from a distance. Travain was not a careless man. That much I knew with certainty. He was deliberate in everything. The way he built that business, the way he structured every agreement, the way he read every document twice before his pen touched it. A man like that does not leave someone's name on paperwork by accident. He simply does not. I did not know what that meant yet, but I felt it settling into me like something solid. I called Zuline. She picked up on the first ring. I told her everything I knew. Only the facts, nothing I hadn't confirmed, nothing I was still guessing at. I told her about Mr. Bodine, about the words he used, about the letter coming from the Johnson family's attorneys. I told her my name was apparently on something connected to Travain's business, and I did not yet know what that meant in full. Zuline did not interrupt me once. Not once. And when I finished, she was quiet for just a moment before she spoke. She said, "Olathe, Travain Johnson was not a careless man, and his family are not generous people. If that letter is coming from them, you open it alone first. You hear me? Alone." The letter had not arrived. I am not a patient woman when it comes to things I cannot control. I know this about myself. So I did what I have always done when my mind gets too loud for the house to hold it. I went to the garden. It was December in Huntsville. Nothing needed tending. I went anyway. I pulled on my coat and my old gardening gloves, and I walked out to the beds along the back fence, and I stood there in the cold, looking at ground that was dormant and waiting. And I thought about Travain Johnson. Not the way you think about an old love. The way you think about a chapter of your life that shaped you before you understood it was shaping you. Our marriage, was not a fairy tale. Trevane was disciplined and sometimes distant, a man whose attention lived mostly inside whatever problem he was solving. I was organized and sometimes lonely in the specific way of a woman who is capable enough that people forget to ask how she is doing. But we built something real together, and we both knew it. When it ended, it did not end with drama. It ended the way serious things sometimes end, with two people who had simply stopped growing in the same direction. We each hired attorneys. The divorce was quiet. Assets divided by category: the house, the joint accounts, the car. Both attorneys worked from what was directly in front of them. What was in front of them were the standard disclosures. Equity positions inside a privately held business were not treated the way public investments are treated. The shares Trevane had placed in my name years earlier were minority non-distributing units tied to company expansion, the kind that sat quietly on internal corporate records unless someone went looking specifically for them. Nobody did. Nobody flagged it. The paperwork was never amended. And so the shares stayed exactly where Trevane had placed them years before, in my name, untouched, while I rebuilt my life in Huntsville and told myself I had left Birmingham with nothing. The business itself kept growing. New locations, new contracts, new acquisitions, but Greer Family Funeral Homes reinvested almost everything back into expansion and operating reserves. There had never been a major liquidity event. No public sale, no shareholder payouts arriving in mailboxes every quarter. The value accumulated quietly for decades inside the company itself. Trevane saw that settlement before he signed it. I know this because Trevane read every document twice and understood what he was reading better than most people understand their own names. He saw the omission. He knew those shares were still registered to me, and he left them there. I stood in my December garden and I sat with that truth. Not as a romantic gesture. I would not insult either of us by framing it that way. As a recognition. I had earned my place on that paperwork. 3 years of books kept, phones answered, family sat with. He knew what I had contributed, and he never had a reason to remove me that outweighed his reason for keeping me there. Correcting the ownership later would have required formal restructuring inside the company and amended filings neither of us had any reason to invite after the divorce. So the shares stayed where they were, quiet, dormant, valuable. His family knew too, and they honored it because it was Trevane's decision, and in that family his decision stood. I heard the back door open. Harston stood in the frame looking out at me. He asked why I was standing outside in the cold. I told him I needed air. He stayed there a second longer than necessary. Then he said, carefully, "You've seemed somewhere else these past few days." Not accusatory, not tender either. Just observant in the delayed way people become observant after they realize something may already be moving without them. I told him I was thinking. He nodded slowly and went back inside. I watched him disappear into the warmth of the house. I thought about what concern looks like when a man means it. I thought about a night in the arrangement room in Birmingham when I was working late, and Trevane came in without a word and laid my coat across my shoulders. I had forgotten that entirely. I remembered it now with the kind of clarity that only comes when you finally have something to compare it to. I went inside. I took the box from the closet shelf. I found the photograph. Me and Trevane standing in front of the building with the hand-painted sign, both of us young, neither of us knowing yet what we were building. I carried it to the kitchen counter and set it where I could see it. Harston noticed it when he came through the kitchen an hour later. His eyes stopped on the frame, then on me. He almost asked. I watched him decide not to. The next morning, I opened the front door and there was an envelope in the mailbox. Thick. From a law firm in Atlanta, acting on behalf of the Johnson family estate. My name on the front in clean block print. Olathe Cade, formerly Olathe Johnson. I brought the envelope inside and set it on the kitchen table. Then I made coffee, not because I needed it, because I needed the 2 minutes it took to make it. I measured the grounds, filled the reservoir, listened to the machine run. Harston's car was gone. He had left before I came downstairs. The house was mine. The morning was mine. And Zuline's voice was sitting in the back of my head, where it had been since the night she said it. Alone first, I sat down at the table. I looked at the envelope for a moment. Then I opened it. I read it straight through without stopping. The language was formal and dense in places. Sections I understood completely. Sections I moved through slowly, absorbing the structure without catching every word. I let it wash over me the first time. When I reached the last page, I set it down, sat back. Then I picked it up again and read it from the beginning, this time slowly, section by section, giving each paragraph the full weight it was asking for. 18% of Greer family funeral homes. Registered in my name since the second year of my first marriage. Never transferred. Never amended. Documented across 3 pages with the kind of legal precision that does not leave room for misreading or misunderstanding. The acquisition price, the per-share value, the accumulated equity value held across decades of company growth and expansion. Language explaining that the national buyout constituted the business's first major liquidity event and required full shareholder settlement. And then the total figure. I did not react immediately. I want to be precise about that. I read the number, and my mind went very quiet. The particular quiet that comes not from emptiness but from the sudden arrival of something too large to process in a single breath. Then my breathing changed. I set the letter down, reached for my coffee, set that down too without drinking it. The figure was not a mistake. It was not an approximation or an estimate. It was documented and exact. The result of 18% of a regional funeral services group that had grown for decades before being sold to a national acquisition firm. Decades of value sitting quietly inside a privately held business until the day the company itself was sold, and everything had to be accounted for in full. It was life-changing in the specific way that means you will never again have to ask permission for your own comfort inside someone else's house. I heard something outside, a car door, a neighbor's voice, something ordinary moving through the world while I sat as inside mine completely rearranged. I refolded the letter exactly as I had found it, slid it back into the envelope, carried it to the closet, set it in the box behind Trevaine's photograph, closed the box, put it back on the shelf, closed the closet door. By the time I sat back down, my coffee had gone cold. I drank it anyway. I sat in my kitchen in Huntsville, Alabama, and I allowed myself to feel something I had not felt in a long time. It was not happiness. It was not relief. It was closer to recognition, the particular feeling of something that was always true, finally being stated in a language you can hold in your hands and read with your own eyes. I thought about the word poor. I thought about my daughter typing it. I thought about my husband pressing a button to confirm it. I thought about what they did not know and what they were going to continue not knowing for a little while longer. Not because I was being cruel, because I was being careful for the first time in 19 years. Harston came home at noon. He walked into the kitchen and looked at my face the way a man looks at something he senses has changed but cannot name. He asked, "You all right?" I looked at him evenly. I said, "I'm fine, Harston." And for the first time in longer than I could honestly measure, I meant it completely. I called Mr. Bawden the following morning with a list. I had written it the night before, in my careful handwriting on the back of an envelope. Questions organized by category. Nothing left to memory. Nothing left to the moment. When he answered, I moved through it methodically. Timeline for the acquisition closing. Disbursement options. Full buyout. Structured payment schedule. Partial trust retention. Tax implications at each stage. Contact process for next steps. He answered each question fully. But I noticed something in the pauses between his answers. A slight recalibration, the kind a professional makes when the person on the other end of the line is not what they expected. He had called a woman named Oletha Cade, formerly Oletha Johnson. He had prepared for uncertainty, for emotion, for questions that needed to be walked back from the edge. Instead, he got a list. He adjusted his register to meet mine, and we finished the call in 11 minutes. Before I hung up, I asked about confidentiality. He confirmed without hesitation. My equity position was documented solely in my name. Nothing moved. Nothing was disclosed without my authorization and my signature. I thanked him and ended the call. Zulian had referred me to an attorney. A woman, late 40s, with an office on the north side of the city. I called her that same morning and made an appointment for Tuesday. Harston knew I went to the Garden Supply Center on Tuesdays when the weather was manageable. I did not tell him I would be going somewhere else instead. I was not lying to him. I simply had not mentioned Tuesday's specific destination. There is a difference, and I understood it precisely. Something shifted in me after that. Not dramatically. Not in any way another person would immediately notice. I was not warmer or colder. I was simply more settled inside myself than I had been in years. The constant low-level caution I carried in this house, the one that made me soften my opinions before I spoke them, and minimize my own needs before anyone else could, had started loosening its grip without my permission. Harston noticed before he understood. That evening at dinner, he talked about gas prices, and the weather, and something a man at work had said about Alabama football. I answered where answers were required, passed the salt when he asked for it, cleared the plates afterward the way I always had, but twice I caught him looking at me a second longer than necessary. Once when I laughed softly at something on the television and did not explain what amused me. Another time when I walked past him toward the kitchen and he opened his mouth like he meant to ask something, then closed it again instead. Finally, he said it. That lawyer letter wasn't bad news, was it? The question landed lightly, dressed as concern. But I heard the real thing underneath it, curiosity arriving late and trying not to sound like suspicion. I dried my hands on the dish towel and looked at him. No, I said evenly. It wasn't bad news. He waited another second, maybe expecting more. When none came, he nodded once and looked back at the television. But his attention stayed on Amy the rest of the evening, in small, unfinished glances he probably thought I didn't notice. Brunelle called after dinner. She said she was just checking in. Brunelle does not just check in. She calls with purpose and wraps it in pleasantry. I was pleasant in return, brief. I answered what she asked and offered nothing she didn't ask for. When she asked how I was doing, I said I was fine and meant it in a way that gave her absolutely nothing to build on. The call lasted 4 minutes. I learned later, not much later, that she called Pruitt immediately after, told him I sounded strange, too calm. Pruitt told her she was reading too much into it and that I was probably still upset about the group post. He was wrong, but I was glad he said it. I was washing the last of the dinner dishes when I heard the knock. I dried my hands, opened the front door. Delvine was standing on the porch in the December cold without a hat, which meant she had left the house in a hurry or in a feeling she hadn't planned for. She looked at me with something unresolved sitting directly behind her eyes. Then she said, "I've been thinking about the post." "I didn't write it, Mama." I looked at my younger daughter for a long moment. Then I opened the door wider and said, "Come in then." She sat down at my kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the coffee cup I set in front of her. Delvine has never been comfortable in this house. She arrives in it the way people arrive in rooms where something about the space makes them feel their own smallness. Not because anyone has made her feel that way, but because she carries something unresolved, and a room this quiet gives it nowhere to hide. She turned the cup in her hands the way she has done since she was small, when she had something difficult to say and didn't yet know where the beginning was. I sat across from her and waited. She told me Brunelle wrote the post and read it to her out loud before she sent it. She laughed. She said that twice, that she laughed, and both times her voice went flat in the way of someone making sure they do not minimize what they are confessing. That laugh, she said, was the same as saying yes. She had been carrying it since the moment Brunelle hit send. Then she went further back. She said she was 9 years old when she understood that our marriage was ending. Not when anyone told her, before that. Children understand the temperature of a house before adults decide to explain it. She said she watched me leave Birmingham and watched me build a life up here that looked quieter than the one I had left, and she made a story out of that. The story was that my silence meant I was fine with it. That small meant chosen. That if I had wanted more, I would have asked for more. And since I never asked, I must not have needed it. She said she knew now that was wrong. She said she didn't know if saying so changed anything. I listened to all of it without interrupting once. When she finished, I sat with what she had said for a moment before I responded. I said, "I hear you. Not it's fine. Not I forgive you, baby." Not anything that would have let her put it down and walk out lighter than she came in. Just, "I hear you." She looked at me the way people look when they receive something that is neither what they hoped for nor what they feared. She didn't speak for a moment. There was nothing easy to say to honesty that precise. What Delvine gave me in that kitchen was something Brunelle has never once offered. Not the apology itself, but the willingness to sit inside her own part of it without asking me to make it smaller so she could bear it. Brunelle wrote those words as a verdict. Delvine laughed as a woman who had been storing up old pain and found someone else's cruelty a convenient place to let it breathe. Those are not the same thing. I had always known that. Now I had heard her say it herself. Before she left, she stopped at the door with her hand on the frame and turned back. She asked, "Are you okay, Mama? You seem different." I looked at my younger daughter and I said, "I'm exactly who I've always been, Delvine. People are just starting to look closer." She left with that. I heard her car back out of the driveway, and I stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet she left behind. That evening, I called Zuline. I told her the figure from the letter. Not around it, not in pieces. The full number, stated plainly. The line went completely silent. Then Zuline said, "Lord have mercy, Trevane Johnson." And for 10 full seconds, she said nothing else at all. Zuline was at my door at 8:15 with a covered dish she absolutely did not need to bring. That is how she loves people. Not with announcements or performances. With food that shows up before you asked for it, and a presence that fills whatever space the trouble has emptied out. I took the dish. She came inside. We moved around my kitchen, the way women move around each other when they have been friends long enough that the silence between them has its own language. I got the letter from the closet. I brought it to the table and I walked her through it, section by section, slowly the way Mr. Bowden had walked me through the framework on the phone, except now I had the full document in front of me, and I understood every word of it. Zuline read without rushing. She did not react while she was reading. She did not look up at me or make a sound. She simply read, with the full attention of a woman who knows that understanding something correctly matters more than responding to it quickly. Halfway through, she stopped once to adjust her glasses and said quietly, "Lord." Then she kept reading. When she finished, she folded the letter exactly as she had found it, handed it back to me. And then she looked at me, the way women look at each other when they have been watching something for a long time and have finally been given proof of what they always knew. She said, "I have watched this house for a long time, Aletha." She said she had watched Harston follow his daughter's temperature, agree with whatever they said, adjust to whatever they decided, perform concern only when they were watching. She said she had watched me sand my own edges down year by year to fit a space that was never designed to hold all of me. She said she had watched me call that peace when what it really was the absence of conflict. Those are not the same thing, and we both knew it, and she had never said it out loud until now. Then she said, "Trevane Johnson saw what you were worth when you were 26 years old, with nothing but a drugstore ledger and good sense. This house never had the eyes for it." I did not respond to that immediately. I let it sit where she put it. From the living room, Harston's television came on suddenly loud, some sports commentator arguing about football rankings. Zuline's eyes shifted briefly toward the sound, and then back to me again. Neither of us spoke until the volume lowered. Then I asked her what she thought I should do. She looked at me steadily and said, "I think you made a decision the night you read that post. I think you have been building toward it quietly ever since. You don't need me to tell you what to do. You need me to tell you that you're right." I didn't deny it. There was nothing to deny. So I told her what I actually wanted. Not the money, what the money made possible. The ability to leave on terms that were mine. To stop measuring myself against what this house decided I was worth. To be Aletha Cade at full size, in full voice, without editing myself down before I walked into any room. I had not said any of that out loud before, not to anyone. The words felt strange in my mouth and completely accurate at the same time. Zuline listened to every word without interrupting once. When I finished, I asked her, "How long before this house figures out that something has already moved?" She leaned back slightly in the kitchen chair and thought about it instead of answering immediately. That was another thing about Zuline. She respected a question enough to actually consider it before speaking. Then she looked at me with the particular steadiness of a woman who had watched quietly from next door for 19 years and knew exactly what she had seen. She said, "Harston will notice when there's nothing left to notice. That has always been his problem." Tuesday morning, I sat across from a woman who dealt in facts. Her office was clean, a desk, 2 chairs, afternoon light coming through a single window. The kind of quiet that belongs to rooms where serious things get decided without drama. I had brought the letter, my notes, and my list. She reviewed everything without rushing, without the recalibrating pauses I had noticed in Mr. Bowden. She had seen documents like this before. She knew exactly what she was looking at. When she finished, she set the letter down and told me what it meant in plain language. Because the equity position had been registered in my name before my marriage to Harston, and because it existed as a documented asset originating from my first marriage, it fell entirely outside Alabama's equitable distribution framework for my current marriage. Harston had no claim to it, no petition, no negotiation, no legal argument that would survive contact with the documentation in front of her. It was mine, completely and only mine. I listened to that, the way I have listened to everything in these past weeks, without visible reaction, absorbing each word at the depth it deserved. When she finished, I asked 2 follow-up questions. She answered both. Then I thanked her and we were done. I signed the acquisition documents that same afternoon in Mr. Boughton's firm's satellite office on the east side of the city. I initialed every page where I signed my full name where it asked for my full name. Aletha Cade, formerly Aletha Johnson, equity holder, 18%, signature on file. The woman at the desk witnessed it and notarized it, and that was that. Decades of a business growing and being sold, and the paperwork completing itself in a room that smelled like printer ink and old carpet. On the way home, I stopped at a bank I had never used before, not the branch where Harston and I held our joint account, a different institution entirely on the other side of town. I opened an account in my name alone. It took 22 minutes. I had spoken briefly with a realtor earlier that week, not about listing anything, just information. What was available in certain neighborhoods, what the market looked like, what a woman with liquid resources and no partners required could buy outright without negotiation and without anyone else's name on the deed. She had mentioned one property specifically, smaller than my current house, better garden space, quiet street. I drove past it on my way home. I sat outside it for 10 minutes with the engine running and looked at it the way you look at something that does not yet belong to you, but could. The garden beds ran along the full length of the left side fence. The street had trees. Nothing about that house had a single memory I would have to decide what to do with. I felt something I had not felt in so long I had almost stopped expecting it. Anticipation. Clean anticipation, with no dread underneath it. I pulled away and drove home. Brunel's car was in my driveway. That by itself did not mean much. Brunel came by often enough when she needed something from the house. Old photographs, Harston's opinion on something involving the children, help with a school form she didn't feel like reading carefully herself. But through the front window, I could see them in the living room. Brunel and Harston, heads angled toward each other. The posture of 2 people deep inside the conversation they believed was private. The moment I opened the front door, they both straightened. The talking stopped. The room rearranged itself around my presence the way a room does when the person it was arranged against has just walked in. Harston asked how my trip to the garden supply center was. Not where had I really been. Not what was in the letter. Not anything direct. Just the question sitting there lightly dressed as normal conversation, while Brunel watched my face too carefully from the couch. I set my purse down slowly. I said, "Productive." Then I took off my coat and walked past both of them toward the kitchen. Behind me, I felt the silence follow. Brunel sat in my living room and was warm in a way she hadn't been in months. She complimented the curtains, asked about the garden, suggested we plan something together in the new year. Maybe a trip. Just the 2 of us, somewhere we had always talked about going. She said it, the way people say things they have no intention of following through on, but need to sound like they do. I sat across from her and watched every word of it land exactly where she placed it. I have spent a lifetime recognizing when warmth is instrumental. You learn the difference early, when you are a woman who has had to make herself useful to be tolerated. Genuine warmth is careless. It doesn't arrange itself. What Brunel was doing in my living room had been arranged. She got to it eventually. She said she heard something had come from a law firm. Said Harston mentioned it. Just in passing, nothing serious. She wasn't trying to pry, but she wanted to make sure I wasn't in any kind of trouble. She reached over and touched my hand when she said it. "You know you can always come to us, Mama." I looked at my daughter and I said, "I'm not in any trouble, Brunel." And I said nothing else. Let me tell you what that visit confirmed. Harston saw the envelope from the law firm arrive. He watched me receive it. He said nothing to me. Not a question, not a word of concern, not so much as everything all right. He went to his chair and he called his daughter. That is the complete sequence. That is the complete man. I had been sharing a house with him for 19 years, and I had never seen him more clearly than I did sitting across from the daughter he had dispatched to find out what I knew. Brunel tried a softer angle when the first one didn't open anything. She said I seemed like I had a lot on my mind lately. Said she just wanted to make sure I was okay. Her voice had the particular texture of someone who has confused performance with sincerity for so long they can no longer tell the difference themselves. I told her I was fine. I asked about the grandchildren. I offered her more coffee. She accepted. We sat in my living room for another 20 minutes and had a conversation about nothing that mattered and everything that did, and not one true thing passed between us the entire time. When she left, she kissed my cheek at the door. I stood at the window and watched her car back out of the driveway, and I waited until it disappeared before I moved. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was not anger and it was not hurt, it was confirmation. Every quiet decision I had made since that letter arrived, the attorney, the account, the signed documents, the drive past that house on the quiet street, every single one of them had been correct. Not vindicated. Correct. There is a difference. Vindication requires an accuracy just requires the truth. That night, Pruitt called Harston. I was in the hallway when Harston's phone rang, and I stayed there. His voice was low and careful, the voice of a man who believes he is being private. I heard him say, "I don't know what's in it." She won't say. A pause, then, "She's been different, yeah, since that letter came." I stood in that hallway and listened to my husband describe me to his son-in-law like a problem he was trying to solve. I felt nothing except a steady, quiet certainty that I was almost done. Delvine called on a Thursday morning, and she didn't begin with warmth. That was the first thing I noticed. "No, how are you? No, how have you been?" She said my name, and then she said she knew about the letter from the law firm because Brunel had told her. Then she said, "I'm not calling for the same reason she came over." I sat down. I told her that something significant had happened and that I was handling it. I did not give her figures. I did not give her details. I gave her the shape of it. Enough to confirm that what Brunel had sensed was real. Enough to show Delvine that I was not in trouble and not in over my head. She listened without pressing me for more than I was offering, which is a thing Brunel would not have done. Then Delvine said, "Whatever it is, Mama, Brunel, and Pruitt have been on the phone every day this week about it. Every day. I just thought you should know that." A pause. "I'm not part of that. I want you to know that too." I heard what that cost her to say. Brunel is her sister, and they have operated inside the same family current for decades. Same father, same house, same version of events. Stepping out of that current, even by one phone call, is not a small thing. When Brunel found out that Delvine had warned me there would be consequences between them, Delvine knew that when she dialed my number, she called anyway. I did not thank her immediately. I sat with what she had said and I asked her something directly. I said, "If it turned out I had something significant, Delvine, what would you want from me?" The line went quiet. Not the brief quiet of someone gathering words. The longer quiet of someone who has been asked something they were not prepared for and is deciding whether to answer it honestly or carefully. I waited. I did not fill the silence for her. Then she said, "I wouldn't want anything from you. I'd want to know you were okay." I listened to that. I turned it over the way you turn something over when you are trying to determine whether it is solid all the way through or only on the surface. The audience watching this story will make their own determination. I made mine, and I kept it to myself. What I will say is this. Delvine laughed at that post before it was sent. That laugh was a door opening, and I have not forgotten it, and I will not pretend otherwise. But there is a difference between the woman who writes the words and the woman who laughs and then spends weeks deciding which side of herself she actually wants to be on. I know that difference. It matters even when it is not the whole story. I made a decision about Delvine after I hung up that phone. I did not tell Zulene. I did not write it anywhere. I let it settle in my chest where the things I am certain about live, and I left it there. That evening I was sitting in the living room when Harston came in. He did not sit beside me. He pulled the chair from the corner and set it across from me, and sat down in it the way a man sits when he has decided he is conducting something. The distance between us was deliberate. I looked at it and I understood it completely. He said, Aletha, I think it's time you told me what's in that letter. I looked at my husband across the space he had placed between us, and I said absolutely nothing. Thursday night, Harston asked his question, and I said, when the time is right, Harston. Not a refusal, not an argument, a timeline. Mine. He sat across from me in that chair he had pulled from the corner, and he waited for something more, and nothing more came. I watched him not know what to do with that, and I went to bed. Saturday morning, my phone rang at 9:15. The voice was measured and formal, the voice of a man raised to conduct business with manners. He introduced himself as Eustace Johnson, Trevaine's brother. He said he was already in Huntsville handling final acquisition matters connected to several regional properties, and that the acquisition attorneys needed one final in-person shareholder execution before closing documents could be released Monday morning. He said the Johnson family preferred to handle legacy shareholders directly rather than through overnight courier service whenever possible, especially in matters connected to Trevaine's original ownership structure. Then he asked if 11 o'clock was convenient. I said, that's fine, come at 11. I did not tell Harston. I set the kitchen table, made a full pot of coffee, and I put on the navy dress I wear when I need a room to understand immediately that I am not someone to be managed. I did not know yet that Harston had called Brunell and Pruitt the night before. I learned that later. What I knew at 10:50 was that Skog was in my driveway again, and Pruitt was standing in my living room with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had arrived prepared for a negotiation. Harston had arranged witnesses for the conversation he intended to force about the letter. He had decided that Saturday morning was when Olathe Cade was going to explain herself. The doorbell rang at 11 o'clock exactly. Eustace Johnson was a man in his middle 60s, Birmingham built, wearing a dark suit on a Saturday morning because that was the kind of man he was. He carried a leather portfolio, and he shook my hand at the door and said, Mrs. Cade, thank you for receiving me. He did not look past me at Harston. He did not acknowledge Brunell or Pruitt. He had come to conduct business with me, and I was the only person in that house his eyes were interested in. I brought him to the kitchen table. He opened the portfolio. He walked me through the final documents, my equity position, the acquisition terms, the disbursement structure, the notarization requirement. He spoke to me as a principal, as a shareholder, as the woman whose name had been on that paperwork for 31 years. The room was completely silent behind us. I did not turn around to look at it. Then Eustace said, your brother made clear before he passed that your position was to be honored in full. The family has always understood that. Nobody in that kitchen made a sound. I signed every page. The notary Eustace had brought witnessed each signature. I initialed where indicated. When it was done, Eustace closed the portfolio and stood and extended his hand, and I took it, and he held it with both of his for a moment and said, he always said you were the one who kept the book straight. I said, he was right. I walked Eustace to the door. He thanked me again. I thanked him. The door closed behind him with the quiet finality of something that had just been completed and could not be undone. I turned around. Harston was standing at the kitchen counter. Brunell was beside him. Pruitt was just behind her. Three people whose faces had gone absolutely still, not with grief, not with anger yet, but with the particular expression of people who have just understood that the room they walked into was not the room they thought it was. I looked at all three of them. I said, coffee's still warm if anyone wants it. Pruitt spoke first. He said, so, and I looked at him, just looked at him. The sentence stopped where it was and did not continue. And Pruitt sat back slightly in the way of a man who has just understood that the room he is in has different rules than the room he prepared for. Harston started with concern. That was his opening. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I said anything? Was I sure I had the right people handling it? He asked each question in the careful voice of a man who believes, if he frames self-interest, as worry it will be received as love. I answered what I chose to answer. The rest I let sit in the air between us uncollected. Brunell moved through 3 positions in the space of 40 minutes, and she moved through them with the practiced ease of a woman who has never been made to stay in one place long enough to be held accountable for it. First, she was shocked. Hand to her chest, eyes wide. Mama, I had no idea. Then she was warm, reaching for my arm. So happy for me. This was wonderful news. Then she repositioned entirely, constructing herself in real time as my closest advocate, my most devoted daughter, the one who had always been in my corner. She referenced the grandchildren. She mentioned Christmas. She began describing a future in which she and I were closely aligned, and the last month had not happened the way it happened. I sat with my coffee cup in both hands and I watched all of it. When she paused, I said, "Brunelle, I remember the post." Not loudly, no heat behind it. I stated it the way you state something that is simply true and requires no decoration. She stopped. Every door she had been building in that kitchen closed at the same moment, and she knew it, and I watched her know it, and I did not help her find another one. Pruitt said nothing after that. He understood that the conversation had moved somewhere. His presence was no longer useful. They left 40 minutes later. Brunelle kissed my cheek at the door, the same cheek she had kissed after her last visit. The same performance at the same threshold. I closed the door behind them and stood in my kitchen with Harston, just the two of us. For the first time since all of this began, he sat down at the table. He looked at his hands for a moment, and then at me. His face had the particular expression of a man who has arrived too late at an understanding he could have reached weeks ago if he had been paying a different kind of attention. He said, "I should have said something about the post." I said yes. He waited. He was waiting for the rest of it. The reassurance, the softening, the moment where I made it easier for him to put it down. I looked at him across the table and I let him wait. The rest of it did not come. That one word was the full and complete truth, and it was all I had for him. That evening, Delvine called. Brunelle had reached her first. The version Delvine repeated back to me was so rearranged I would not have recognized it except for the outline. I listened to all of it without correcting a word. When she finished, I said, "Come for dinner Sunday. Just you." Delvine said yes before I finished the sentence. Sunday, I cook the meal I make when I want to mean it. My mother taught it to me in a Birmingham kitchen when I was 11 years old, and she was still alive, and the world was still a place where I believed the people who were supposed to love you simply did. I have not made it often in this house. It belongs to a different kind of occasion than this house has usually offered me. Delvine arrived on time. She came in without the unresolved energy she used to carry through my door. She came in the way people come in when they have made a decision about themselves and are living inside it. We sat at the table and we ate, and we did not perform anything for each other. No managed warmth, no careful distance. Just two women and food, and the kind of quiet that has enough history in it to hold its own weight. I told her what she needed to know, the shares, what Trevane had decided, and why the paperwork had stayed in my name through 30 years of a business growing without me in it. The company had never paid direct distributions to minority holders. Profits were rolled back into expansion, new locations, acquisitions, operating reserves. The sale was the first true liquidity event the business had ever had. That was why the money arrived all at once now instead of in pieces across the years. Trevane knew exactly how those shares were structured when he left them where they were. I understood that clearly now. I told her about the acquisition, what I had signed and what I had put in motion before any of them understood that anything was moving. I did not explain myself. I did not apologize for the sequence or the silence. I informed her the way you inform someone you have decided to trust with the truth. Delvine sat with both hands flat on the table, and she listened to every word. Then I told her about the house, the offer I had made, the acceptance I had received, February. I said it the way I would say the weather, plainly, without drama, because I was not asking for her approval, and I was not looking for her comfort. The decision was made, and it was mine, and I was simply telling her so. Then I told her about the account, separate, already established, her name on it as beneficiary, not a fortune. Enough to matter. Enough to say what I meant without having to find the words for it in that moment. Delvine's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together and looked down at the table and did not smile for a long moment. I let her have that. I did not rush her through it. She asked about Harston. I said, "Harston will be fine. He always is. That's the thing about people who take up space without contributing to it. They never lack for somewhere to land." I said it without bitterness. It was not a wound I was reopening. It was simply an accurate observation about a man I had spent 19 years trying to misread as something more complicated than he was. After dinner, we took blankets from the chest by the back door and we sat on the porch. January in Huntsville is cold enough to mean it. We sat in it anyway. This is how my mother and I used to sit, side by side, not always talking, just present in the same air. Delvine said, Brunel's been posting family pictures all weekend, like none of this ever happened. I looked at her. She gave a small, tired shake of her head and said, now everybody suddenly wants to act like they've always loved you properly. I looked out at the garden, brown and bare and completely dormant. It comes back every spring without fail. It does not require anyone's permission or belief to do so. It simply comes back because that is what it does. I said, I know you are. Then I said, I kept the books on that business for 3 years with a drugstore ledger and my good sense. They called me poor in a family group chat. Look at us now. Delvine made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else entirely. We sat in the cold a while longer. Then I said, and this I said to no one but myself, to the garden, to the January air, to every room in every house where I had made myself smaller than I was. In this house, I had learned to take up less space. I had gotten so good at it, I had almost convinced myself that small was the same as safe. I know the difference now, and I am done being small for anyone.